If you've ever poured your heart and soul into something, only to have someone try and erase your name from it, then you know exactly how this story starts. And if you're here, I hope you'll stick around for how it ends. It helps to know I'm not just talking to myself. So do me a favor, hit that like button, and let me know you're listening. It means more than you know. My name is Frances, and for 15 years, my entire world was contained within the climate-controlled walls of the Vance Family Foundation's archive. It wasn't just a job, it was a covenant. My grandfather, Arthur Vance, built a chemical engineering empire from nothing but a sharp mind and a refusal to cut corners. But he believed his true legacy wasn't the patents or the profits, but the whys behind them. The foundation was his attempt to codify that why, to fund education, to champion ethical science, and to leave a permanent record of a life lived with purpose. And he made me its guardian. I was the head archivist, a title that felt as sacred as a vow. I preserved our legacy. Every letter, every ledger, every blueprint, they all passed through my hands. I knew the smell of the ink on 70-year-old stationery, the precise weight of the leather-bound corporate charters. This was my air, my water, my life's work. But legacies are fragile things, especially when placed in the hands of those who see them not as a responsibility, but as a brand. When my grandfather passed, the foundation's leadership shifted. The quiet reverence for history was replaced by a loud hunger for publicity. And at the head of that charge was my cousin, Garrison. Garrison, who had my grandfather's name, but none of his substance. He saw the foundation as a platform, a gilded ladder to social prominence. He spoke in buzzwords and treated our history like a marketing campaign, to be edited and focus grouped for maximum appeal. I found him tiresome, but harmless. I was wrong. The inciting incident didn't happen in a boardroom shout match. It happened in the hushed, almost holy silence of my archive. Garrison appeared at the door one Tuesday afternoon, his suit looking too sharp, too modern for the room. He never came down to the archive. He called it the morgue. He was holding a tablet, and his smile was a thin, predatory line. He said, "We have a problem, Frances." He showed me a file on his screen, a proposed partnership with a massive tech philanthropy. It was a 9-figure deal, the kind that would put the Vance Foundation, and by extension Garrison, on the global stage. But their due diligence team was deep in our records, and they were getting close to something. A shadow in our family's pristine narrative. He swiped, and a different set of documents appeared on his screen. Scans of ledgers from the late 1950s. My ledgers. I knew them instantly. They detailed the financing for one of my grandfather's earliest chemical plants, and they detailed, in my great-uncle Jonathan's spidery handwriting, a series of payments. Payments to a local official, payments to a safety inspector, payments that were clearly, unequivocally, bribes to ignore environmental and safety shortcuts. It was an ugly truth, a compromise made in the company's infancy, a stain my grandfather spent the rest of his life trying to wash away with good works. It was a part of our story, a vital one. It was the mistake that defined his later commitment to ethics. Garrison didn't see it that way. He saw a liability. He told me, "This can't exist. We need to show them." The plant was funded through a line of credit from the bank. And then he said the words that stopped the world. He told me, "So you're going to fix it." He didn't mean he wanted me to hide it. He meant he wanted me to falsify it, to create a new, clean set of ledgers, to use my skills, my knowledge of the paper, the ink, the aging processes I had perfected for preservation, and use them for desecration. He wanted me to make a lie look like the truth. I felt a quiet heat flush up my neck. I looked from the tablet to his expectant face. I said, "No, that's not how this works. The archive is a record, not a script." He just sighed, a sound of profound disappointment, as if I were a stubborn child. He said, "Frances, you don't seem to understand. The family comes first. This deal is the future. Your dusty papers are the past. You'll do it, or you're out." I stood there, surrounded by the literal weight of my family's true history, and I looked my cousin in the eye. I said, "Then I'm out." I expected him to argue, to threaten. He didn't. He just nodded, a small, cold smile on his lips, as if this was the outcome he wanted all along. He tapped on his phone. A minute later, 2 security guards appeared at the door. They didn't look at me with malice, just a weary professionalism. Garrison said, "Francis's role here is being made redundant as part of our modernization strategy. Please escort her from the building. She won't be needing anything from her office." I didn't say another word. I walked past the shelves of my life's work, past the guards, and out of the foundation I had called home. As I left, Garrison said one last thing, not to me, but to one of the guards. He said, "And make sure her name is removed from the staff registry and all historical documents listing Foundation officers. We need to streamline the narrative." He wasn't just firing me, he was erasing me. For months after that, I was a ghost. My calls to family members went unreturned. My existence had become an inconvenience to the brand. I was a loose thread he had snipped away. What he didn't realize, what none of them realized, was that I wasn't just the archivist. I was the archive, and I had kept my own copies. The silence that followed my firing was a physical presence. It filled my small apartment, muffling sounds, pressing in on me. For 15 years, my days were structured by the quiet hum of climate control systems, the scent of old paper and bookbinding glue, the rhythmic click of my keyboard cataloging the past. Now, my days were shaped by a formless void. I'd wake up, and for a terrifying second, I'd think I was late for work, a phantom sense of purpose pulling me from my bed before the crushing reality settled back in. I had nowhere to be. I was no one. My name, once etched into the Foundation's masthead as head archivist, had vanished. I checked the website. My biography was gone. The archival department was now listed as being under the directorship of legacy curation, a meaningless title held by a marketing intern Garrison had hired. They sent me a final paycheck and a box of personal effects from my desk, a coffee mug, a few pens, a framed photo of my grandfather. It was a sterile, efficient amputation. I became a ghost in my own life. I'd walk past the monolithic stone building of the Vance Foundation on my way to the grocery store, and I'd feel a wave of vertigo, as if I were looking at a place that existed in another dimension. I was on the outside now, a tourist in a history I had curated. The family treated me like a communicable disease. My aunt, Garrison's mother, left a clipped, 2-minute voicemail. She said she was sorry it had come to this, but Garrison was under a lot of pressure, and the Foundation needed to evolve. It wasn't an apology, it was a justification, a demand for my silent compliance. It was a message that said, "Your sacrifice is expected." The others were just silent. No calls, no texts. Decades of shared holidays and family history evaporated in an instant, because I refused to desecrate a ledger. In those dark, empty months, my mind replayed the past on a loop. It was a desperate attempt to find the exact moment the path had diverged, when the foundation my grandfather built had started to become the brand Garrison was selling. I remembered my grandfather, Arthur, a man whose hands, even in old age, were stained with the faint scent of chemicals, and whose mind was a library of formulas and principles. He took me down to the archive, for the first time, when I was 12. It was a dusty, disorganized basement room back then. He knelt, his knees cracking, and pulled out a heavy, leather-bound book. It was his first lab journal. He opened it to a page filled with his elegant, precise script. He said, "This room is the family's conscience, Francis. It will hold our triumphs, and it must hold our failures. The truth doesn't have an agenda. It just is." He looked at me, his gaze so intense it felt like he was branding the words onto my soul. He said, "Promise me you'll be its guardian. Not its judge, not its editor, its guardian." I promised. It felt less like a choice, and more like a recognition of a duty that was already mine. That promise became my core programming. It was the reason I chose archival studies in college. The reason I turned down more lucrative jobs to come work at the foundation for a modest salary. I was keeping my promise, and for a long time, under the old board, that promise was honored. Then Arthur passed away, and the center of gravity in our family shifted. Garrison, with his MBA and his slick, charming confidence, rose quickly. He had a gift for making old money feel new and exciting. He spoke of synergy and disruption, words that felt alien in the context of our quiet, academic philanthropy. I remember one board meeting, years before the end. I was presenting my annual budget. Garrison was scrolling through his phone, barely listening. When I finished, he looked up and said, $1 million a year to keep dusty papers in a cold room. Imagine the PR splash we could get with that money. The old chairman, a contemporary of my grandfather, had gently rebuked him. He said, "Garrison, that room is the reason we have a story to tell." Garrison just shrugged, but I saw something in his eyes then, a flicker of contempt. He didn't see the archive as a foundation. He saw it as a weight, holding him back from flying higher. It was that flicker of contempt that had planted a seed of unease in me years ago. It wasn't a conscious, panicked thought. It was a slow, creeping dread, the way you feel a change in air pressure before a storm. The world was going digital, and while I maintained our physical archive with religious zeal, I knew that a physical record was vulnerable. It could be burned, it could be lost, it could be altered by a man with a sharp suit and no conscience. So I started a project, in secret. It felt faintly paranoid at the time, a little disloyal, but my loyalty wasn't to the board, or to Garrison, or even to the family. It was to my promise. It was to Arthur. I called it the Aeneas Project. In my head anyway. Aeneas, who saved his family's history from the ashes of Troy. For 3 years, I spent my own money in my own time building a second, parallel archive. A digital ghost. After my official work hours were done, I'd stay late, sometimes until midnight, surrounded by the sleeping history of my family. I bought a museum-grade, high-resolution scanner, one far better than the Foundation's outdated equipment. I brought it into the archive, in pieces, in a duffel bag, over a series of weeks, and assembled it in a small, forgotten closet in the back. Each night, I would methodically work my way through the shelves. I didn't just scan the documents. I photographed them under different light spectra to capture watermarks and paper texture. I recorded the precise dimensions, the paper weight, the ink composition where I could. I created a fortress of metadata around every single file, a web of provenance, so strong it would be unimpeachable. This is where my training became my weapon. I wasn't just making copies. I was creating digital facsimiles that were in some ways more real than the originals, because they were supported by a scaffolding of pure data. And for the most critical documents, the ones I instinctively knew were vulnerable, like the ledgers about that 1950s plant, I took an extra step. I learned about cryptographic hashing and blockchain. It sounds complicated, but the principle is simple. I created a unique digital fingerprint, a hash of each scanned file. Then, I paid a minuscule fee to embed that hash into a public blockchain transaction. It was like carving a fingerprint into a digital stone tablet, time-stamped for all eternity. Anyone could verify that my digital copy existed in that exact form on that exact date. Any future alteration would be instantly detectable. It was a plausible inaccuracy to call it a perfect legal shield. Some archivist might say I was oversimplifying the chain of custody, but I knew it was a powerful deterrent. I was cheating time. I was creating a version of the truth that could never be erased. It wasn't about revenge. I have to be clear about that. At the time, it was an act of preservation, an insurance policy against the decay of memory, against the kind of convenient forgetting that Garrison specialized in. I was building a lifeboat, not a battleship. This secret project was my only solace in the months I was unemployed and adrift. I'd open my encrypted hard drive on my personal laptop and just look at the files. The ghost archive. It was all there, safe, intact. A perfect, silent testament. It was a cold comfort, but it was all I had. I was burning through my savings. I started applying for other archival jobs, but my resume had a 15-year hole in it that was impossible to explain. The Vance Foundation was my only significant employer, and they wouldn't give me a reference. I was professionally radioactive. The despair was a physical ache, a tightness in my chest that never went away. Then, one rainy Tuesday, 6 months after I was fired, an email appeared in my inbox. The subject line just said, "An inquiry." The sender was a name I knew well, Julian Croft. He was a documentarian, a modern-day Ken Burns, famous for his sprawling, deeply researched series on American industries. His work was legendary for its integrity and its unflinching honesty. I had all his series on my shelf. I opened the email with trembling hands. He wrote that he was producing a new series for a major streaming network, tentatively titled The Varnish, about the legacies of foundational American companies. The Vance Corporation and its philanthropic foundation were to be a central feature. He said he was reaching out to me specifically. He wrote, "Your name was given to me by a former board member who retired some years ago. He spoke of your work in the highest possible terms, calling you the conscience of the foundation. He said if anyone knew the real story, it was you." He was formally requesting an interview. I read the email 3 times. A current of electricity shot through me, jolting me out of my 6-month stupor. The despair, which had been a cold, heavy blanket, began to burn away, replaced by a different kind of heat. It was the cold fire of resolve. Garrison had tried to erase my name, but a ghost from the Foundation's honorable past had just spoken it aloud to the one person who could broadcast it to the world. Garrison thought he was streamlining the narrative. He had no idea I was about to give Julian Croft the director's cut. My lifeboat was about to become a battleship, after all. It wasn't about revenge. It was about restoration. It was about keeping a promise I made to my grandfather in a dusty basement. A promise to be the guardian of the truth, no matter how ugly it was. And the truth, I realized, was about to have its moment in the spotlight. The email from Julian Croft wasn't just a lifeline. It was a key. It unlocked a part of my mind that had been dormant, frozen by shock and grief. The strategist woke up. For 6 months, I had been mourning a past I couldn't reclaim. Now, for the first time, I saw a future I could build. But I knew I couldn't walk into a meeting with a man like Julian Croft, armed with nothing but a grudge and a hard drive. He was a seeker of truth, not a vessel for my personal vendetta. If I was going to do this, I had to do it perfectly. My approach had to be as meticulous, as unimpeachable, as the archive I had built in secret. My first step was to reply to his email. I kept it brief, professional. I thanked him for his interest and confirmed my long tenure at the foundation. I suggested a preliminary phone call to discuss the scope of his project. I needed to understand his angle, to ensure he wasn't just looking for a puff piece that Garrison's PR team would inevitably try to shape. This wasn't about setting a trap. It was about ensuring the truth would land on fertile ground. While I waited for his response, I dove back into the Aeneas project. My ghost archive. Looking at it now, it wasn't just a collection of files. It was a narrative engine. I had the Foundation's entire story, from the noble genesis to the slow, creeping rot of Garrison's ambition. I had the documents that showed my grandfather personally funding scholarships for the children of miners in West Virginia in the 40s. I had the internal memos, where he fought with his own board to establish the industry's first internal ethics committee in the 60s. And I had the damning ledger from the 50s. The complete story wasn't one of heroes and villains. It was more complex, more human. It was the story of a great man who made a terrible mistake early in his career and spent the rest of his life atoning for it. Garrison wanted to erase the mistake, but in doing so, he was erasing the atonement, the very soul of the foundation. My plan began to form. I wouldn't just give Julian the scandal. That would be messy. He said, she said, affair. I would give him everything. I would give him the whole, complicated, beautiful, and ugly truth. I would give him the raw material to tell a story so much more compelling than the glossy brochure Garrison was selling. A story about legacy, truth, and the cost of forgetting. But I needed help. I had the past locked down, but I had no eyes or ears inside the foundation. I had no access to the present. There was only one person I could trust, Elias. My former assistant, my protégé. He was a brilliant young archivist, with a reverence for history that matched my own. He was quiet, meticulous, and fiercely loyal. I had mentored him, taught him the Vance method of archival science, the very principles Arthur had taught me. Firing me was a blow to him, too. I knew he would be miserable under the new legacy curation regime. Contacting him was a risk for both of us. The Foundation, under Garrison, would be paranoid. It hadn't just call him. I used a secure, end-to-end encrypted email service and sent a message to his personal address. The subject line was a reference to a joke we shared about a particularly difficult archival problem. The Caxton conundrum. He would know it was me. The message was simple. Alias. Ited nok was a manywind tixan. Sheted nok was a manywind tixa manywind. Ited nok was a manywind tixa manywind. Ited nok was a manywind. He managed to talk on a secure line that night. The relief in his voice was palpable. He told me it was worse than I could have imagined. The new director of legacy curation was a 24-year-old with a marketing degree who thought metadata was a new social media platform. They were treating the archive like a prop closet. Worse, he told me, they had begun a records consolidation project. That was the euphemism. They were systematically destroying documents deemed non-essential to the brand narrative. They were shredding history, truckloads of it. Alias had been trying to save what he could, hiding sensitive files, making his own secret copies on a thumb drive he kept hidden in his shoe. He was fighting his own quiet war of resistance. I felt a pang of guilt. I was about to ask him to take an even greater risk. I told him about Julian Croft. I told him my plan. I need to know what they're creating, Alias. I need to see the lies they're building to replace the truths they're destroying. I need real-time intelligence. He didn't hesitate. He said, Francis, you taught me that our job is to serve the historical record. That's what I'll do. Just tell me what you need. My quiet, scholarly protégé had just become my man on the inside, my field agent in a war of information. I asked him to be careful, to prioritize his own safety. But we both knew the stakes. He was now the guardian of the present, while I held the key to the past. My phone call with Julian Croft was the next day. I was nervous, but I channeled the calm, authoritative demeanor I had honed over 15 years. I spoke about my grandfather's philosophy, about the sacred duty of an archivist. Julian was a phenomenal listener. He asked sharp, insightful questions. I realized quickly he wasn't interested in the sanitized version of the Vance story. He sniffed out the PR language instantly. He said, "Foundations like yours are always presented as monoliths of virtue. I'm interested in the cracks. I'm interested in the choices, the humanity." That was my opening. I said, "Mr. Croft, the story of the Vance Foundation is precisely about the choices, good ones and bad ones." I told him that access to the real, unvarnished records had recently become complicated. I didn't mention being fired. I framed it as a shift in archival strategy under the new leadership. He heard what I wasn't saying. There was a long pause on the line. Then he said, "Miss Vance, what kind of story do you want to tell?" I took a deep breath. I said, "I want to help you tell the true one. I have a proposal. I will provide you with exclusive access to a complete, verified, and incorruptible private archive of the Foundation's history. Everything. The good, the bad, the transformative. In return, I don't want money. I want a voice. I want a role as a consulting producer on the project. My expertise is not just in the documents, but in their context, their meaning. I am the living memory of that institution. Let me help you get it right." It wasn't about revenge, I told myself. It was about context. It was about making sure the story was told with precision and understanding. There was another pause. I could hear him thinking. It was a massive gamble. I was asking a Peabody Award-winning documentarian to give a fired archivist a seat at his table. He said, "That's a highly unusual request." He asked me to send him a sample. Proof of concept. He wanted to see what I meant by unvarnished. That night, I prepared a package. I chose a small, contained example. A minor project from the 1970s. The funding of a public park. The official record, which I knew Garrison's team would have, showed it as a simple act of philanthropy. But I had the original letters. They showed that my grandfather had only funded the park after a bitter, months-long negotiation with the city, who wanted to sell the land to a developer. The foundation had effectively saved the park from destruction. But the story was messy, full of political maneuvering. It was a more impressive story than the sanitized version. Along with these documents, I included a third file, a detailed explanation of my digital verification method, showing the blockchain hashes that proved my copies were authentic and untampered with since the day they were created, years before I was fired. I sent the encrypted package to Julian. The file was titled, "The Varnish and the Wood." The next morning, his reply was in my inbox. It contained only 5 words. "Let's make a television show." The months that followed were a whirlwind of clandestine activity. I was living a double life. By day, I was an unemployed woman, living off dwindling savings, going for long walks, and avoiding my family. By night, I was the secret engine of a major television production. My apartment became a war room. I had a dedicated laptop for my work with Julian's team, firewalled and encrypted. We had weekly video conferences, always on secured channels. I spent hours walking his researchers through the digital archive, explaining the context of letters, decoding the financial jargon in ledgers, and connecting the dots between decades of history. I was painting a complete picture of the Vance legacy, one brushstroke at a time. My primary condition was that the initial episodes of the series, The Varnish, must be an honest, even glowing, portrayal of the Foundation's good works. This was a critical part of the strategy. It wasn't just about setting a trap, it was about honoring the truth. The majority of the Vance Foundation's history was noble. My grandfather's vision had done immense good in the world, and that deserved to be told. I provided Julian with the stories of the first scholarships they gave, the groundbreaking scientific research they funded, the quiet, anonymous charity my grandfather insisted on. I wanted the world to see what the foundation was supposed to be. I wanted them to understand the scale of the legacy that Garrison was willing to risk for a PR win. It was the only way the eventual reveal of the scandal would have its full devastating impact. It had to be a fall from a great height. Julian understood this instinctively. He wasn't a hitman. He was a master storyteller. He saw the power in the contrast. The first 3 episodes were meticulously crafted to build the myth of the Vance Foundation. He interviewed retired employees, former scholarship recipients whose lives were changed, and historians of industry. My Ghost Archive provided the visual backbone, crisp, beautiful scans of letters of gratitude, original project proposals, photos of my grandfather breaking ground on schools and libraries. Meanwhile, Elias was my lifeline to the present. He was a phantom, moving silently through the Foundation's offices. He fed me a steady stream of intel. Garrison was ecstatic about the documentary. He had given Julian's team full, if carefully curated, access. He saw it as his masterpiece, a coronation. Elias sent me screenshots of internal emails. Garrison was already planning a lavish premiere party. He was taking all the credit, telling the board he had proactively engaged with Croft's team to leverage their brand synergy. He was high on his own supply, completely blind to the abyss opening up beneath him. Elias's most crucial contribution was what we called the counter-narrative. He managed to get access to the new falsified documents Garrison's team was creating. The fixed ledger for the 1950s plant was being designed by a third-party marketing firm. Elias, using a clever bit of social engineering, managed to get a junior designer to show him the work in progress on his screen, under the guise of checking for brand font consistency. Elias took a high-resolution photo of the screen with his phone. It was a perfect, pristine lie. A fake history designed to look real. We now had both sides of the story, the truth and the forgery, ready to be presented, side by side. As the air date for the series approached, a quiet calm settled over me. I had done the work. I had laid the track. Piece by piece, the train was coming. There was a part of me that felt a sliver of dread. This would tear my family apart. It would drag my grandfather's name, and my great-uncle's, through the mud. But then I would remember my grandfather's words. The truth doesn't have an agenda. It just is. And I would remember Garrison's smug, dismissive face as he had me escorted out of my own life. It wasn't about revenge. It was about balance. It was about restoring the moral gravity that Garrison had tried to defy. The series, The Varnish, premiered in October. The first episode was a sensation. The critics raved. It was hailed as a masterful look at the golden age of American philanthropy. My family was ecstatic. I received a sudden flurry of texts from aunts and uncles, the first contact in over 6 months. They were all variations on the same theme. Isn't it wonderful what Garrison is doing for the family name? I didn't reply. Garrison was insufferable. He was quoted in trade magazines and business journals. He talked about the responsibility of legacy and our commitment to transparent storytelling. Elias told me he was walking around the office like a king. He was planning a huge gala for the night of the 4th episode, renting out a ballroom and flying in donors from all over the world. He was building his own funeral pyre and inviting everyone to watch. The night of the 4th episode, I sat alone in my apartment. My phone was off. My laptop was closed. There was nothing more for me to do. The episode was titled, The Conscience of the Archive. It began just like the others, with the warm, authoritative voice of the narrator and beautiful shots of the Foundation's work. Then, about 10 minutes in, the tone shifted. Julian Croft appeared on screen, sitting in a leather chair. He looked directly at the camera. He said, "But a legacy is not just the story we choose to tell. It is also the story we choose to hide." The screen filled with a high-resolution scan of the original ledger from my ghost archive, the spidery handwriting of my great-uncle Jonathan, the column of illicit payments. The narrator detailed the bribery scheme with cold, factual precision. Then, the screen split. On the left was my authenticated, decades-old original. On the right was a crisp, clear image of the forgery Elias had captured from the designer's screen. The dates were different. The handwriting was a flawless, but soulless imitation. The numbers told a neat, clean, and utterly false story of a bank loan. Julian Croft's voiceover was devastatingly simple. He said, "The Vance Foundation, under its current leadership, was presented with these two histories. One was the truth, the other was a lie. The one on the right is what they were preparing to show our cameras and the world." The episode ended with a slow zoom into my grandfather's signature on a letter where he vowed to always uphold the highest ethical standards. The silence that followed was louder than any explosion. The fallout was instantaneous and catastrophic. Elias, who was live texting me from the catering kitchen at Garrison's gala, described the scene. The episode was playing on huge screens around the ballroom. When the split-screen image appeared, a wave of shock rippled through the crowd. Phones came out. The low murmur of conversation turned into a roar of panicked whispers. Donors were looking at Garrison, their faces a mixture of confusion and disgust. Garrison himself had gone white. He stood frozen, a champagne glass in his hand, his face a mask of disbelief. He was watching his own execution on live television. Within minutes, the story was exploding online. News alerts pinged on every phone in the room. The headline wasn't about a 70-year-old scandal anymore. It was about a modern, active, and breathtakingly arrogant cover-up. The 9-figure philanthropic partnership, the one that Garrison had sacrificed me for, was the first to fall. Their CEO was at the gala. Elias watched him walk straight up to Garrison, say something short and sharp, and then turn and walk out, his entire entourage following him. A press release went out less than an hour later. The partnership was suspended, effective immediately, pending a full investigation into the foundation's breach of ethical conduct. The panic inside the foundation was absolute. Elias described a scene of pure chaos in the following days. The board was in emergency sessions. Lawyers were swarming the building. Garrison was apparently locked in his office, screaming at his staff, demanding to know who the leak was. He was blaming everyone: the IT department, the marketing firm, the junior staff. He was a captain on a sinking ship, trying to find someone to throw overboard, not realizing the hole was in the hull he himself had drilled. He tried to fight back. The foundation's PR team issued a statement calling the documents in the documentary malicious forgeries and a baseless attack from a disgruntled former employee. They didn't name me, but they didn't have to. It was a desperate, clumsy move, and Julian Croft was ready for it. The next day, his production company released a web-exclusive supplemental feature on the show's official website. It was a 10-minute video. It showed 3 of the world's top forensic document experts, each in their own labs, independently analyzing my digital files. One expert confirmed the chemical signature of the 1950s ink and the aging of the paper fibers from my high-resolution photos. Another, a cybersecurity expert, walked the audience through the blockchain verification. He showed, in simple, clear graphics, how the cryptographic hash of my scan was logged on a public ledger years ago, making it a mathematical impossibility for the file to have been created or altered recently. He said, "This document isn't a forgery. It's a truth that has been waiting patiently to be told." Garrison's lie was not just exposed, it was academically, forensically, and publicly dismantled. He had brought a knife to a nuclear war. He had assumed I was a simple archivist with dusty papers. He had no idea I had built a fortress of verifiable, cryptographic truth. The narrative was no longer his to control. It was mine. The ghost was now running the machine. The foundation wasn't just losing face, it was hemorrhaging the one thing it couldn't operate without trust. The web of relationships my grandfather had spent a lifetime building, and which I had spent my career tending to, was unraveling in a matter of days. It began with the smaller donors, family friends, local businesses, people who had given money to the foundation for decades, out of respect for Arthur Vance and his principles. They started calling, their polite but firm messages, all carrying the same theme: we cannot have our name associated with this. The grants, once a steady stream, were being turned off, one by one. Then the board began to fracture. The older members, the ones who remembered Arthur, were horrified. The retired board member, who had given my name to Julian Croft, wrote a scathing open letter to the rest of the board, which was promptly leaked to the press. He called Garrison's actions a moral stain on the Vance legacy and demanded his immediate resignation. The newer members, the ones Garrison had brought in, tried to circle the wagons, but the financial and reputational damage was too severe. The foundation was a ship taking on water, and the captain was the one who had dynamited the hull. That's when the calls started. My phone, which had been silent for half a year, began to ring. First, it was my Aunt Carol, Garrison's mother. Her voice was thin, reedy, a pale imitation of its usual confident tone. She didn't ask how I was. She launched directly into a monologue of wounded confusion. "How could you do this to the family, Francis? After everything we've done for you?" It was an astonishing act of narcissism. They had cast me out, erased me, and now they were positioning themselves as the victims of my refusal to be a ghost. I listened, said nothing, and when she paused for breath, I simply said, "I have to go, Carol." And I hung up. Next was my uncle. His approach was different. He tried to be the voice of reason, the peacemaker. He said, "Look, Franny, Garrison made a mistake. He was under pressure. He's young. Let's all just sit down and figure out how to," and he trailed off, because there was no end to that sentence. How to what? Put the truth back in the box? Unring the bell, that had just chimed across the entire country? He was asking me to help them build a better lie. I told him, there's nothing to figure out. The story is told. The final call came late one night. An unknown number, I answered. A voice said my name, and it was a sound I hadn't heard in months. It was Garrison. He sounded terrible. His voice was hoarse, stripped of all its slick, confident varnish. He didn't yell. He pleaded. He said, Francis, you have to fix this. You're the only one. You can put out a statement. Say you were confused. Say the documents were misinterpreted. Tell them it was all a misunderstanding. He was offering me the chance to immolate myself, to keep him warm. The sheer, breathtaking arrogance of it was almost impressive. Then came the offer. He said, come back. We need you. I'll give you whatever you want. Your old job, a new title. We'll create a new position for you, Chief Legacy Officer. A huge raise. Just fix it. Tell the world that the narrative they saw was wrong. There it was, the ultimate irony. The man who fired me for refusing to falsify history was now begging me to do it on a global scale. He thought my price had just gone up. He didn't understand that I was never for sale. I let him finish his desperate, rambling pitch. The silence stretched on for a long moment. I could hear his ragged breathing on the other end of the line. Then I said, very quietly, Garrison, the history is the one thing I can't fix. It's already written. I paused and added, I just made sure it was published. I disconnected the call. I sat there in the dark of my apartment, the phone feeling heavy in my hand. The power shift wasn't a feeling of triumph. It wasn't a rush of adrenaline. It was a profound and sudden quiet. The scales, which had been so violently tipped against me, had finally definitively come to rest. I had not screamed, or fought, or clawed my way back. I had simply stood still, holding the truth, and let the world pivot around me. The board meeting was held 2 days after my call with Garrison. They didn't ask me to attend. They summoned me. It was held in the main conference room, a space I had only been in a handful of times, usually to present a budget that would be summarily trimmed. This time, I was at the center of the table. The air was thick with a funereal solemnity. Garrison was there, at the far end. He looked like a scarecrow in an expensive suit, hollowed out and sagging. He wouldn't meet my eyes. The interim chairman, a stern but fair man who had been friends with my grandfather, addressed me. He didn't ask for an apology. He asked for an explanation. He said, Francis, the board would like to understand your perspective on the events of the past week. It wasn't an accusation. It was a genuine question. They were finally ready to listen. I stood up. I didn't have any notes. I didn't need any. I looked around the table at the worried, anxious faces of my family and the other board members. I said, my perspective is the same as it was the day I was fired. I was asked to betray the single most important principle upon which this foundation was built, that our history in its entirety is our greatest asset. I was asked to use my skills to intentionally corrupt the historical record for a short-term financial gain. I refused. I paused, letting the words settle in the quiet room. The consequences that have unfolded are not a result of my actions. They are a result of Garrison's. I did not create this crisis. I only refused to participate in the cover-up. Then I turned my head and looked directly at Garrison for the first time. He flinched, but he couldn't look away. I said, your argument was that the family must come first. My grandfather believed that the truth must come first, because without it, the family's name is worthless. It seems the world agrees with him. I sat back down. The silence in the room was absolute. No one defended him. No one argued. I had presented them with a simple, undeniable equation. My loyalty to the principle versus his betrayal of it. The meeting was adjourned. 20 minutes later, I walked out of that building for the second time. The first time, I was in exile. This time, I was a sovereign power. The news broke the next morning. A formal press release from the board of the Vance Foundation. Garrison Vance had resigned, effective immediately, to pursue other opportunities. The board announced a full independent audit of all archival records and a renewed commitment to transparency and historical integrity. The nine-figure partnership was officially irrevocably cancelled. The empire of optics that Garrison had built had crumbled to dust. My vindication wasn't in his downfall. It was in what happened next. A week later, I got a call from Julian Croft. His voice was buzzing with energy. He said, "The network just saw the final viewership numbers and the engagement metrics. They're through the roof. They've greenlit season 2. I congratulated him, genuinely happy for his success. But he wasn't finished. He said, "And they approved your new title, on one condition, that you accept it." He sent me an email. I opened it. It was a single image file. A mock-up of a title card, the kind you see at the end of a film. The elegant font of the show's logo shimmered on the screen. It read, "The Varnish, a Vance story," and, underneath, in clean, sharp letters, "Executive Producer, Francis Vance." I stared at the screen, and for the first time in a very long time, I laughed. A real, deep, cleansing laugh. Garrison had offered me the title of Chief Legacy Officer to buy my silence, to manage a lie. The world was now offering me the role of executive producer to broadcast the truth. I was no longer just the guardian of the archive. I was the storyteller. I had the final cut. I now had the sole power to decide how our family's story was told, not in the dusty silence of a basement, but on a global stage, for millions to see. It was never about getting my old job back. It was about creating a new one, a role I had never imagined, but which I had apparently been training for my entire life. In the end, it wasn't about revenge. I find myself saying that a lot, and I wonder if I'm trying to convince you or convince myself. Perhaps it's both. Revenge feels hot and chaotic. What I did was cold, and it was orderly. It was an act of archival science applied to justice. Garrison's story, his spectacular failure, is now a part of the Foundation's history. It's a new chapter in the ledgers, a cautionary tale about the difference between image and identity. I didn't erase him, the way he tried to erase me. His story now serves the legacy, a permanent reminder of the stakes. I've come to believe that a true archive has no villains, only subjects. I'm sitting in an editing bay now, the glow of the monitors casting long shadows on the walls. It's a different kind of archive, one made of light and sound instead of paper and ink. But the principle is the same. Julian and I are storyboarding the second season. We're not just focusing on my family anymore. We're telling the stories of other whistleblowers, other guardians of truth, who were cast out from the institutions they tried to protect. My story became a magnet for their stories. My email is flooded with people like me, who saved the receipts. The board of the Foundation, under new leadership, has given me a formal, permanent role. I am the head of an independent archival oversight committee. I have final say over the preservation and presentation of our family's history. I go back to the archive sometimes. Elias is the new head archivist. He runs it with a fierce, quiet pride. He's training a new generation of guardians. When I walk through those climate-controlled aisles, I feel my grandfather's presence. I feel his approval. The promise is kept. The conscience is safe. They tried to make me a ghost in my own story. They took my name, my job, my place in my own family. They thought that by silencing me, they could rewrite the past. But they made a fundamental mistake. They forgot that history is patient. It waits, and they forgot that a person who has dedicated their life to the truth has a different kind of strength. It's not the strength to fight, but the strength to endure. The strength to hold on to the facts when everyone else is trading in fiction. So this is my message to you, to anyone out there who has been overlooked, underestimated, or erased. Your truth has weight. Your history has value. You might feel like a ghost right now, but ghosts have their own power. They see things others don't. They remember things others choose to forget. Sometimes you have to become the archivist of your own life. You have to carefully, meticulously, preserve the facts, the emails, the documents, the memories. You have to build your own secret archive of what really happened, because you never know when the world will need a storyteller. You never know when you'll be the only one left who can set the record straight. Your name, your work, your truth, it's your legacy. Don't ever let anyone else tell you what it's worth. If my story resonated with you, if you've ever felt like your voice was being silenced, do me a favor and leave a comment below. It's incredibly validating to know that you're not alone in these struggles. This community is a powerful reminder that our stories matter. So please, like this video if you found value in it. Share it with someone who might need to hear this message today. And of course, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss what we're telling the world next. Thank you for listening.